I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual that evening, adjusting the neckline of the dusky blue silk dress I'd stitched myself. Every seam was intentional, every thread a silent rebellion. I had picked the color because it reminded me of twilight, soft, dignified, with the kind of quiet power I'd never been allowed to claim. The Delaney 40th anniversary was being held at Brenmere Estate, a vineyard 2 hours north of the city, known for its barrel-aged reds and Instagrammable garden paths. My sister Vanessa had handled the planning, of course, calligraphy menus, vintage Rolls-Royce for photos, jazz trio flown in from Boston. Everything was perfect. Picture perfect. Except I didn't want to go. I hadn't wanted to RSVP. I hadn't wanted to wear silk or smile through speeches or dodge backhanded compliments about being so creative. But I still got in my car and made the drive. I still showed up. Because somewhere under the layers of old wounds and low expectations, a part of me still hoped. Hoped maybe this time they'd see me. Not just as the different one, but as someone whole. The estate glowed like a painting, warm amber lights strung through oak trees, lanterns lining the stone walkways, servers in white gloves offering oysters on porcelain. I checked my reflection in the car window one last time before walking in, whispering to myself, just survive the evening. Inside, the family had already assembled. Graham, my older brother, was in the center of a laughing circle, talking about a new pediatric surgery technique. Vanessa, perfect as ever, held court by the champagne fountain, wearing a sequined dress and the exact shade of confidence I had never been allowed to own. Mom spotted me first. She smiled politely, not warmly, and gestured toward the far table. Naomi, over here, sweetheart. You just missed Graham's toast. Of course I had. Dinner was plated and delicate, lamb with a rosemary demi-glace, beets arranged like abstract art. Everyone's glasses were full, laughter came easy, the type of laughter that always excluded me. I took small bites and smaller breaths. Then Charles, my father, stood. Knife against glass, clink, clink, clink. Before dessert, he announced, raising his glass with the familiarity of a man used to toasting himself, I just want to say a few words. My spine stiffened. His eyes skimmed the table, pausing only briefly when they landed on me. 40 years with the love of my life, he said, placing a hand on Mom's shoulder. And 2 brilliant kids, Graham saving lives, Vanessa saving corporations. He smiled. Everyone smiled. Then he looked at me, held it, and smirked. And Naomi. A pause. Trying her best not to embarrass us tonight like she usually does. Laughter. First a few chuckles. Then more. Someone, I think Aunt Cynthia, actually snorted. Vanessa covered her mouth and muttered, Dad, like it was just one of his jokes. Mom looked down at her plate. Graham tapped his wineglass with a spoon, light and dismissive, as if to say, moving on. No one said a word to me. And I didn't say a word either. I folded my napkin, placed it carefully on my lap, then pushed back my chair as quietly as I could. I stood, straightened my spine, picked up my clutch, and walked out. No drama. No confrontation. Just the sound of my heels clicking against the polished stone, echoing across their curated joy. The fairy lights above the garden swayed gently in the breeze, as if mocking me with their artificial warmth. I didn't look back. Not once. I reached my car, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The silence inside was thick, clean, mine. And as I drove away, past the vineyard rows, past the laughter, past the chandeliers and Chardonnay, I didn't cry. Because this time, it wasn't humiliation that made me leave. It was clarity. That was the last time I let them define me. I used to think there was something wrong with me. Not in the loud, obvious way that needed fixing, more like a subtle crack beneath the surface that everyone else could see, but no one dared to name. Growing up as a Delaney meant learning early that there were only 3 acceptable outcomes for your life: prestigious degrees, high-paying titles, and polite, polished obedience. My brother Graham was the blueprint. By 14, he knew he wanted to be a doctor. By 18, he was shadowing surgeons during summer breaks. Now he's a pediatric specialist with a spotless white coat and a kid named Jackson who's never once left the house in wrinkled clothes. Vanessa? She made partner at a Manhattan law firm before her 32nd birthday. Her wedding was black tie only 3-day weekend in the Hamptons, strings of fairy lights over a heated tent, and monogrammed napkins for guests to cry into while she read her vows. She married a man who calls his suits bespoke and his wine investment grade. And then there was me. Naomi. The creative one. The one who turned cereal boxes into dollhouses, who covered my bedroom walls with mood boards and paint samples and fairy light sketches by age 10. The one who reupholstered the living room armchair when I was 12, unprompted, of course, and got scolded for ruining family furniture. While Graham discussed textbooks and Vanessa practiced debate skills at dinner, I doodled designs for floating beds and light installations no one would ever build. I wasn't praised. I was politely tolerated. "Oh, Naomi," Mom would sigh, not unkindly. "You've always marched to your own drum." They never stopped me. But they never clapped either. Every passion was a phase. Every accomplishment a cute anecdote at best. Like the time I spent 3 months hand-designing a mural for the local community center. I showed them the magazine article it got featured in. Vanessa flipped through it like she was searching for something more interesting. Graham asked, "Is this paid work or just for fun?" I remember bringing a watercolor portrait I did of Graham's newborn son, soft pastels, delicate brushwork, stenciled name in gold leaf. He laughed when he opened it. "Thanks, but we hired a real decorator. This'll go in the closet, probably." He meant it as a joke. They all did. But jokes wear down skin like sandpaper when they come from people who are supposed to love you. The worst was Mother's Day. I had spent an entire week building a vertical herb garden for Mom. She loved cooking with fresh basil and mint. I measured, sawed, painted, and stenciled her initials into the corner in soft lavender. I showed up early, dirt still under my fingernails, gift in hand. She blinked at it. Said, "Oh, that's different." Then Vanessa handed her a luxury handbag and the room erupted in applause. That was the moment I felt it click inside me. Not rage. Not jealousy. Just finality. A quiet knowing that I would never be what they respected. And slowly, I began to withdraw. I stopped offering to help decorate holiday tables. I stopped suggesting themes for family birthdays. I stopped arriving early to set the mood. Not because I was bitter. Not because I didn't care. But because I had finally learned the language they spoke, and I wasn't fluent in it. Their language was prestige and pedigree. Mine was texture and light. They spoke in expectations. I replied with intuition. They wanted predictability. I offered perspective. And every time I tried to translate myself into their terms, it came out crooked. So I stopped translating. They didn't have to scream. Their silence said enough. And when I look back now, not as a child aching to belong, but as a woman learning to unlearn, I realize something. They never saw me as broken. They just didn't know how to love something they didn't understand. The anniversary party didn't pause when I left. No one came running. No one called my name through the garden or followed the sound of my heels down the stone path. The jazz trio played on, smooth and unbothered. Glasses clinked. Laughter returned. Another toast was probably made. The Delaneys were good at pretending nothing ever cracked. I drove with the windows down, my dress fluttering against the seatbelt, vineyard air cooling my collarbone. I didn't cry. There wasn't sadness left, just a startling sense of release. A release that had been waiting years to arrive. What surprised me most wasn't the pain. It was how quiet the break felt. Not like smashing glass. More like gently placing something down and walking away. The next day, I turned my phone off and left it that way. For hours. Then days. At first, the messages came in quickly. "Vanessa, everything okay? You left so fast." "Mom, Dad didn't mean it." You know how he gets. Graham. Classic Naomi. Always making a moment hers. That one made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was proof. Even my silence was inconvenient for them. I didn't respond. A week passed. Then 2. The texts got shorter, colder. "Vanessa, still ignoring us?" "Mom, you'll regret distancing yourself." "Dad, Nothing, of course. Just silence, which somehow stung more than his insults. By the third week, the notifications stopped. And for the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to have peace that wasn't earned through performance. I moved out of the city the following month. I didn't announce it. No grand statement. No goodbye dinner. I just packed my things into a rental van and drove until the skyline disappeared behind me. Willow Bay was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask questions. A coastal town 3 hours north with cedar trees lining every road and salt in the air that softened your lungs. I found a one-bedroom loft above a florist shop, with creaky wood floors and sun that poured through the windows like warm honey. The space was small, imperfect. But it was mine. No one knew my last name there. No one asked about Graham's hospital or Vanessa's law firm or what country club Charles belonged to. I wasn't the Delaney daughter anymore. I was just Naomi, a woman with a sketchbook, a toolbox, and enough stubborn hope to begin again. I started taking on small interior design projects. Vacation rentals, local shops, cozy fixer-uppers. Nothing fancy. Nothing to brag about. But every space I touched made someone feel seen. And for the first time, that was enough. I began sketching again, late at night with jazz playing low and peppermint tea beside me. Not for clients. Not for praise. Just to remember what it felt like to make something without needing it to prove a point. And in the stillness, in the absence of group chats, brunches, and birthday invitations I never really enjoyed, I found something else. I found my voice. Not the voice that had to raise itself to be heard. Not the voice that was constantly explaining, defending, shrinking. But the voice beneath all that. The one that whispered, "You don't have to ask permission to be whole." And maybe it was strange that no one noticed when I stopped showing up. I missed Vanessa's charity gala. I didn't RSVP to Graham's daughter's recital. I skipped Thanksgiving, Christmas, even my mother's carefully curated birthday brunch. No one called. Which told me everything. I hadn't just walked away from their table. I had finally built my own. And I didn't need a seat saved anymore. The silence wasn't absence. It was finally mine. It started with a single line of charcoal. I didn't mean to sketch anything. I just sat on the floor one morning, barefoot, coffee in hand, the sound of ocean wind rustling against the old windows. The page was blank. The world was quiet. And then my hand moved. A curve, a contour, an outline of an archway I once dreamed about in a childhood notebook. Then soft layers of light, scribbled in graphite, not color. I wasn't drawing for a client. I wasn't drawing for Instagram. I wasn't drawing to prove anything. I was drawing because I finally had space to hear my own thoughts. Willow Bay had that effect. Every morning, I woke up with light pouring through the loft windows, catching dust like glitter. The florist downstairs played Nina Simone through the ceiling vents. And I started filling my studio wall with sketches, not blueprints or mock-ups, but thoughts. Shapes. Textures. Sometimes I'd sketch a window for an hour, just trying to find the right angle for sunlight to feel like a hug. I took on small projects in town, nothing headline-worthy. A cafe owner who wanted his space to feel like fall all year. A retired librarian who asked if her guest bedroom could breathe better. A young couple who said they wanted their home to smell like honey and feel like quiet. That was the thing about Willow Bay. People didn't want perfection. They wanted peace. And that was something I could finally give. A few months in, I started a personal blog. Nothing fancy, just process photos, reflections, before and after shots of corners I was proud of. I titled it Still Light Studio, after a phrase I wrote in my sketchbook once. Light should feel still, not frozen. Gentle, not staged. One foggy afternoon in late October, I opened my inbox and saw the subject line. Wellness Retreat, Collaboration Inquiry. I assumed it was spam. But the sender's signature said Senior Architect, Iridia Studio, Portland, Oregon. They had stumbled across my blog through a mutual contact. They were developing a wellness retreat in the Oregon forest, cabins, walking paths, meditation spaces. And they wanted me to conceptualize the heart of the project. The communal space. The place people would go to feel like they belonged. I read the email 3 times. My pulse didn't race. I didn't scream or call anyone. I just sat there, hands warm around my mug, heart strangely still, and whispered, yes. It wasn't just a job. It was a doorway. Designing that space became the most intimate project of my life. I poured myself into every inch, sourcing reclaimed wood with stories in its grain, finding glass that caught sunset like memory, building in curves instead of corners so people would feel held, not boxed in. No harsh lines. No sharp echoes. Only breath. Only invitation. 6 months later, the Aradia retreat opened. Quietly. No ribbon cutting. Just an evening walk through the mist with tea lights guiding the path. Guests stepped inside the main space, a high-ceilinged hall with skylights shaped like falling leaves, and one woman actually cried. It feels like the forest wanted me here, she said. That was the greatest compliment I'd ever received. A few weeks after the opening, Hearthlight Journal published a full spread on the retreat. A 6-page feature titled, Nature Reimagined, a space that breathes back. My name was on the byline. Not as a footnote. Not as the decorator. Not as someone's quirky daughter. As the lead designer. The article quoted me. I wanted to build a space where even the quietest person could feel like they belonged. A place that didn't ask for credentials to feel safe inside. The pendant lights were hand-blown glass I found at a local maker's market. The linen curtains were dyed in plant-based indigo by a woman who sang while she worked. The kitchen shelves held mismatched clay bowls and spices from places I'd never been but wanted to honor. I didn't decorate it to impress. I curated it to feel like truth. Once it was ready, once the last candle was poured, the last light dimmed just right, I planned the party. I didn't call it a housewarming. That felt transactional, like a milestone on someone else's checklist. I called it the gathering. Linen cardstock invitations. Blind-pressed floral embossing. Hand-addressed in gold ink. No digital RSVP. Just an old-fashioned reply card tucked inside with one quiet line. Let's celebrate what we build for ourselves. I mailed out 35. Design clients who had become friends. Mentors who never treated my work like a side project. Former classmates who remembered me not as the weird one, but as someone who always saw the room a little differently. Not one invitation went to a Delaney. Not out of bitterness. But because this wasn't for performance. This was for peace. The night of the gathering, the house glowed from within. Warm sconces, tea lights on the windowsills, soft jazz weaving through the air like breath. The garden had come to life. I strung lights from cedar posts and tucked rosemary sprigs into the linen napkins. A local chef I'd befriended served slow-roasted vegetables with lemon-thyme glaze and lavender creme brulee in hand-thrown dishes. People arrived just before sunset. Their footsteps crunched gently on the stone path. They walked through the open front door like it was a portal. And then, they paused. Every single one. They looked up, around, into the light. This looks like something from Elder and Hearth, someone whispered. Even a woman I'd met once at a conference messaged me. Your story helped me walk away from people who never clapped for me. But buried between the likes and confetti emojis were names I hadn't seen in months. Vanessa. Graham. Mom. Dad. They hadn't called once since I left the vineyard. Hadn't asked where I lived, what I was building, how I was breathing. But now that there were lights, applause, and evidence of joy, suddenly I was visible again. The first message came from Mom. I saw the photos. The house looks expensive. Why didn't you tell us? Then Vanessa. You really planned a whole event and didn't think we might want to be there? Graham didn't message directly. He just tagged me in an old family photo with the caption. Some people forget their roots. But it was Charles who struck last. An email. Subject, your choices. Body. We saw everything. You embarrassed this family. You acted like we didn't exist. You made people think we don't love you. Maybe next time, think before putting on a show. You should know people are talking. He didn't sign it. Just sent it like a threat wrapped in a tie. I read it once. Then deleted it. I didn't reply. Because I didn't owe anyone a defense for my happiness. Not anymore. They hadn't been hurt by my silence. They were rattled by their fading control. For the first time, I wasn't standing on their stage. I wasn't asking for applause. I wasn't performing. And without their script to follow, They didn't know how to interpret me. That week, Vanessa posted a family photo, the Delaneys around a long dinner table, wine glasses raised, smiles tight as corsets. The caption read, "Some things money can't buy. Real love. Real connection." The comments came quickly. "Aunt Maureen, exactly. Family first. No matter what. Mom, we raised our kids with love. That hasn't changed. Graham, no egos here. Just roots that don't break." I didn't comment. I didn't react. But Jasmine did. She sent me a screenshot with a single word underneath. Performative. She wasn't wrong. It wasn't grief that made them post. It was panic. Because for the first time in our lives, they weren't the narrators of my story. And they couldn't stand that. The message came late on a Wednesday afternoon. "Vanessa, coffee?" "Just us. No performance." I stared at it longer than I should have. Weeks had passed since the photo. Since the email. Since their desperate attempt to rewrite a story they hadn't bothered to read. And now here she was, asking for coffee like we were just two sisters catching up. But something in her tone, stripped of theatrics, of show, made me pause. I didn't say yes. I said, neutral place. No expectations. We met at a little cafe tucked between a used bookstore and a flower shop, the kind of spot where the tables wobble slightly and the windows stay fogged in the corners. She was already there when I arrived, stirring her cappuccino with unnecessary focus, like the foam might give her answers. "Hey," she said, lifting her gaze. Hey. We didn't hug, didn't smile. Just sat across from each other like two people not sure what side of the line they stood on anymore. After a long pause, she exhaled and broke the silence. "Look, I know we've been awful. I'm not here to justify it. I won't defend it." She didn't fidget. Just held my eye like she'd rehearsed this moment and wasn't going to blink first. "That party," she said. "Seeing it online. Not being invited." It felt like a slap. I raised an eyebrow. "A slap?" She nodded. "Yeah, we were excluded." It hurt. I took a sip of tea before replying, letting the warmth coat my throat before I said the words I had swallowed for years. "Vanessa, I've been excluded my whole life. From your jokes. From Dad's toasts. From Mattering." That night wasn't about revenge. It was the first time I celebrated myself without apologizing. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She looked down, voice quieter. "I get that now. Or, I'm trying to." The air between us shifted. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't guilt. It was something closer to grief. "We didn't know how to make space for you," she said finally. "You scared us." I blinked. "Scared you?" "Yeah. You didn't follow the blueprint. You didn't do what we all did. You were unpredictable. You didn't fit." I almost laughed, but didn't. Instead, I leaned forward and said clearly, "That's because I was never meant to be a copy." She looked up at me then, really looked. And for the first time in maybe a decade, I didn't feel like I was auditioning for her approval. "I'm not here to fix things," I said. "I'm not here to be invited back into the circle. I'm not trying to reclaim a seat at a table where I was always a joke between courses." Vanessa nodded slowly, then whispered, "What would it take for us to try again?" I answered without hesitation. "No hierarchy. No performance. No access unless it's earned. I don't exist to make anyone comfortable anymore. If you want to be in my life, you come in as an equal or not at all." She blinked, took a deep breath, then nodded. "That's fair." She didn't ask to see the house. Didn't ask to be tagged in photos. Didn't ask for forgiveness wrapped in linen and lavender. She just asked, "Can I try to do better?" I looked at her. Not as the perfect sister. Not as the childhood rival. Just a woman flawed, uncertain, finally listening. "You can try," I said. It wasn't closure. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was real. And for the first time in our history, I didn't have to shrink to be heard. The second feature in Hearthlight Journal came out in early spring. This one wasn't about a project. It was about me. The editor had reached out after the garden photo circulated. She said my story, not just my design, had resonated. That word stuck with me. Not impressed. Not inspired. After dessert, we drifted into the living room, candles flickering, old records playing in the background. Jasmine walked up beside me, holding her cup with both hands like a talisman. "You know," she said, tilting her head with that quiet grin of hers, "I think this is the first time I've seen you without armor." I looked around at the light filtering across the walls, the way everyone was leaned in, laughing with their shoulders relaxed, and felt it too. Peace. Not the kind you manufacture for company. The kind you build with your own two hands. That night, after everyone left, I stepped barefoot into the garden again. The string lights danced slightly in the wind. The rosemary from dinner still lingered in the air. I didn't check my phone. Didn't scroll. Didn't need a headline. Just this. The stillness. The knowing. The softness of a life that no longer required apology. I had spent so long chasing validation from people who needed me to shrink to feel big. But now I had my space. My voice. My table. And I didn't need applause anymore. They stopped clapping when I stopped performing. So I stopped needing applause. Because this time, I built the table.